Hey there. Just like the Dave Eggleston episode of Broken Silicon that was quite popular with many of you, I'm going to do an intro here just for a minute to explain why an atypical guest would be coming on. You know, typically, Broken Silicon describes itself as a gaming hardware podcast, but we often go into rumors and discussions about things in server and other things connected to computer hardware in general. And that's because to a certain degree, it's all connected, and it gives you insight into things going on behind the scenes that may not be the typical frame rate measuring. But a lot of you enjoyed the Dave Eggleston episode. A lot of you enjoyed Daniel Nenny. And so, you know, Jimmy Song's the real deal. I mean, he's a lecturer for graduate courses in programming. He's been VPs, senior developers. This guy really knows his stuff. And a lot of it is Bitcoin, but a lot of it is computer science. We talk about graphics cards. We talk about, advice to people studying computer science and programming right now. If you enjoy Broken Silicon guest episodes, I would find it very hard to believe you wouldn't enjoy at least most of this conversation. So yeah, we talk about Bitcoin a lot, but we wouldn't be talking about it if I didn't think it was a worthwhile conversation. And so I hope you enjoy this episode, an atypical one, but one with a guest who really has a lot of great knowledge. And again, if you enjoy Broken Silicon guest episodes, I find it highly unlikely you won't enjoy this one. So anyways, I wanted to put this intro to explain, just like that Dave Eggleston episode, why I had an atypical guest on. But without further ado, my conversation with Jimmy Song. The following podcast is brought to you by CDKOffers.com. Use offer code DIESHRINK for 3% off everything on the website and Broken Silicon for 25% off all Windows codes. All right, on with the show. Welcome to Broken Silicon, a computer hardware podcast. I am your host, Tom, and I will let my guest introduce himself.
I'm Jimmy Song, and I am a Bitcoin developer, educator, and entrepreneur, and I've been in the Bitcoin space for quite a while. And we're going to hopefully talk about Bitcoin today.
Yeah, honestly, we talk about gaming hardware. I think I told you that in the email, but every now and then I'll veer into like servers, like server hardware or network communications, and anything connected to computers, which I to be honest, because of the current demand for gaming hardware right now, there's actually a lot of people that get mad if you bring up Bitcoin, to be entirely honest. So
yeah, this was the case in 2017 when graphics cards ballooned to like 3-4 times the normal cost because people were using it for GPU mining on altcoins and so on.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you an example. I had this card that I thought was splurging in 2019. It was $700, but it was my favorite color. It was a special edition version. It did everything I needed it to for editing. And I was able to sell it for $2,000 recently. And I'm just like, you know what? I'm moving. You guys can have it. I felt almost bad, but it's like, I'm not missing this chance to sell. I missed the last chance.
Well, what's crazy is there's like a market for GPU power now. So, I had to do this thing a couple of months ago where I had to brute force like a bunch of words because somebody had forgotten like the last 4 words of their seed phrase. And, I needed a lot of GPU power to go through all the possibilities. And I was able to go on a website where I could just rent a bunch of like 2080 Ti's and other 1080 Ti's and many others. And I literally rented something like 30 of them. Cost me like $500 over a couple of days. But I was able to brute force and find the seed phrase that I needed to.
Well, yeah, I mean, and that's something I tried to explain a lot too, is it's not just like, Ethereum mining. All the way back in 2017, when AMD launched their Vega graphics cards, which they basically just took a professional card because they didn't have the money to design anything else and just sold it to gamers at cost to stay in the market. There were people building render farms that looked a lot like mining rigs for like hobbyist movies and stuff like that. So, I mean, when you get graphics cards into like dozens of teraflops, I think people need to accept that they can be used for gaming or they can be used for a lot of other stuff.
Well, it's got massive parallelization. That's the big thing, and you can do so many things with that massive parallel stuff because oftentimes, like what you want to do is just compute something that's small, but do it many times. And
Hmm.
graphics cards are just so much better for that. I think Nvidia has like that new Tesla card or something like that. It doesn't even do graphics. I think it's
Yeah,
supposed to only
A100.
do so something like that, where all it does is compute because there's such a demand for it, and there's a lot of applications in data science and machine learning and AI and things like that, which use these things.
Well, and there's actually a rumor going around that they're considering using the like lesser yields of that card as a Ethereum mining card because it can do like, I don't know, honestly, like I wouldn't be surprised if it could do like 210 mega hash, like double the card I just sold for $2,000. So, I mean, if I could sell some old card for $2,000 right now, I'm sure they're looking at that and going, well, it was meant for machine learning, but we can probably sell this for 10 grand to some people.
Yeah, well, so I wonder how much of that is inflation versus just market demand or whatever, because there is sort of like a chip shortage that's going on in the entire market. TSMC can't fab chips fast
Hmm.
enough. The entire car industry is affected by this. Most car dealers aren't getting inventory for the spring because you need chips for the cars. Cars actually take up the
Yeah.
most chips or silicon out of any industry. So I honestly wonder how much of it is inflation because we did print something like $4 to $5 trillion last year just in the U.S. And
No,
on a per capita basis, it was all over the world, like much more. So that might be a part of it.
it's very funny you say that. I do a podcast, Die Shrink, for people who support me on Patreon. It comes out every other week. The one that came out an hour ago, I kind of just out of nowhere went into this rant where I'm like, you know what, guys? From where I'm sitting, here's what's going on. Graphics card prices are up. Video games are now $70 instead of 60. Gas
Mm.
prices are up. I'm moving it right now to Tennessee. Um, Housing prices are up. How many things have to be up where you go, well, it's because of the availability of housing. There's a glut. Oh, it's because, developers want more money for games. Oh, it's because, of shipping due to COVID. Like you bring up all these different things and individually they all make sense. But I'm just kind of sitting here and going, can we all just admit everything's 20% more expensive? It's inflation, guys. You could make the argument that it's just inflation at a certain point.
Oh, it's definitely inflation, and you could see it in the raw materials. This is
Hmm.
where we're seeing shortages and like prices going up. You can see it in lumber, you can see it in plastics, you
Yeah.
can see it in aluminum, copper. I like even silicon to some degree. All of that stuff is going up, and you can talk to contractors. They're saying like
Yes,
lumber's
I
gone up
am.
30%, just trees, right? Like there's not
Yeah.
that much processing on these, but this is what happens when you print. M2 money supply last year, at the beginning of last year, was something like 15.5. By the end, it was 19.5 trillion. So, and that's one measure of how many US dollars are in existence. That's an increase of like 30%. You are going to feel it, right? Like
Yeah.
even, it might not be with milk and eggs necessarily, but you're certainly seeing it in meat. You're certainly seeing it in a lot of other
Yeah.
consumer goods like video cards.
Yeah. And well, we're getting maybe a little bit ahead of ourselves. The first point of discussion I actually had is, usually I'll have on either another YouTuber who benchmarks graphics cards or someone who works for Intel. Like the types of people I usually have on, and I drop it into the Patreon. What questions do you have for them? And it's just, dozens within a couple hours. We actually got quite a few questions for you eventually, but at first I asked, "Where's the questions, guys? This isn't some Lambo hodler who's annoying. This is a guy who's lectures for grad students. You could just ask him programming questions and he would know what to say. And everyone just says they're scared to sound stupid. And I asked my friends, we were playing video games, do you have any questions for him? And they're like, I don't know what question I would have that's stupid. I really feel like people are afraid to talk about Bitcoin or learn about it because they don't want to feel stupid, honestly.
Well, and that's a normal reaction. A lot of other people have the reaction. Well, I kind of know what I'm talking about and try to fake their way in and so on. But you have to understand this is not an easy system to understand. Not only do you have to know programming and the technology behind it, but you also have to know a good deal of economics and how things work and what money is supposed to be, what are the ideal properties of money, how Bitcoin fulfills all of that, social consensus, like networking. There's like proof of work.
Hmm.
There's a lot of things that aren't obvious. And I got to tell you, like I've been a programmer pretty much my entire life, and it took me a few years to really grasp what Bitcoin really was. So for your listeners that feel a little bit intimidated, you should. It's a complicated system, but this is where asking some of the quote unquote stupid questions kind of helps. And there is a lot of literature that's out there now that makes it very accessible. I've written a few books on the subject.
I have the
Programming
little
Bitcoin.
the little Bitcoin book. I think it is a very good short
Mm-hmm.
introductory book.
Yeah, but I mean, there are technical details that are not in there that might be
Hmm.
in programming Bitcoin. I've written another book, Thank God for Bitcoin, which is the moral argument for Bitcoin. There's also the Bitcoin Standard, which it approaches things from an economics perspective. So lots and lots of books out there now that you can go grab and be able to speak about. And the thing is, like for gamers, I think the thing that gamers have is that they understand the digital world, right? Like you're
Hmm.
not some boomer that's like not it can't type like 10 words per minute or something like that. Like gamers understand, okay, like this sword in World of Warcraft is worth something, and I'm willing to go and pay for it because it's very valuable and so on. They get the idea of digital scarcity. It's maybe the idea of decentralized digital scarcity, which Bitcoin is. That's a little bit hard to wrap their heads around. And like understand what makes Bitcoin interesting, scarce, decentralized, and all of this other stuff. And I get that. But you shouldn't be afraid to ask the stupid questions. I take them like almost every day on Clubhouse now. So
Hmm.
if you have them, like go ask. There's plenty of resources.
Well, and I think there's two other things that kind of compound the hesitancy to ask a question. There are, if we're being honest, a lot of dumb people who don't understand this, and then they're just
Mm.
talking the most and like doing backflips in front of Lamborghinis and rapping. And so I think people see that, and then they see mainstream media kind of poo-poo it because, well, it is new, and if you're mainstream, you don't want anything new to actually be successful. Let's just be honest. And so if the mainstream media says it's not good, and then the people talking about it, at least the ones getting millions of views, really are kind of, to me, look like idiots. I think there is just this, I mean, everyone's busy. There's just this filter where it's like, nope, I don't need to pay attention to that. Nope, I don't need to pay attention to that. The thing that bothers me at this point, though, is that I still feel like there's a lot of that going around when Bitcoin isn't 2 years old anymore. Like it's over
Mm.
a decade old. And I wrote it off in like 2012. I really wish I wouldn't have. But I didn't in 2013 because I was like, wait, it still exists? Well, then there must be
Mm.
something to this.
Hmm. Yeah, and that's the thing is, I mean, there were gamers back in 2010 that were buying the graphics cards and mining with the
Hmm.
graphics cards to pay off the graphics card, right? Like, and a lot of them like sort of discovered Bitcoin that way, but then dismissed it and then came back in later. The thing is, you really do have to put in the work to really learn what Bitcoin is. And a lot of people honestly aren't willing to put in that work. But now that there is inflation, there is sort of like social upheaval and all sorts of things going on in the world. Like it might behoove you to go and take a look at it because it does affect a lot of this stuff. Like the inflation stuff that we were just talking about. That's the result of monetary policy. And if you don't understand what good monetary policy is supposed to be versus bad monetary policy, which essentially steals from everybody that saves their money, then you really don't get what this how this whole economy works or what you need to do to protect yourself against essentially what is like stealth taxation without any
Hmm.
representation whatsoever. So learning about that, I think would be a wise thing at this point, and dismissing it out of hand, especially given what has been happening the last 12 months, like that, I don't think that's a good move. Like you need to go learn about this, and you need to
Right.
understand
It'd be
that
like dismissing the
there's something
internet,
here.
right? Eventually, you're going to need to make a LinkedIn or something to get a job, guys. Like, you need to
Yeah,
learn the
something like
internet.
that. It is sort of like it does remind me. Bitcoin reminds me of like internet back in like 93, 94,
Hmm.
when everyone was sort of talking about it, but not very few people are actually on it. That's the stage we're at right now. Is
Hmm.
there are the few people like Michael Saylor that are talking about it on like all sorts of TV shows and things like that. But ultimately, like it's gonna come to the masses, and I would suggest that you go take a hard look at like asset prices, your investments, all of that, because they are very, very leveraged at this point. Like a lot of stocks have like insane PE ratios. A lot of bonds yield almost nothing.
Hmm.
Real estate is like at 5, 10 times like annual salary, where it was like 1 year of salary like 50 years ago. So something is very off, and a lot of people are kind of noticing that. And a lot of hedge fund managers, VCs, pension managers, and institutions, they're all going, okay, where do I get yield? How am I going to deal with all of this stuff that's happening? If they're asking those questions, you need to as well.
Yeah. And before we get into that, I actually do want to have you tell people about your background a little bit. I mean, just to make it clear, if anything, that, again, this isn't a gamer who started talking about Bitcoin, noticed he got a bunch of views and then became big. I mean, you're a real programmer, man. Like, I looked through your background here. I've got to say, I mean, I don't know where you'd want to start. Like, I mean, like, just tell people briefly, like, maybe where are you from and what got you into programming?
Yeah, I got into programming as a 9-year-old when I saw like first like these computers. I didn't really even know what those were, but I begged my dad at that point, "Hey, can you get me this computer? Can you get me this computer?" And I don't know, maybe your listeners will enjoy this. That computer ended up being a Commodore 16. Now you might be
Hmm.
saying, "Oh, Commodore 64." No, the Commodore 16. The 64 had all of the games. The Commodore 16 was sold at Toys R Us, and my dad decided to get me that one. And it literally only had like 3 games, one of which was Jack Attack, which I thoroughly enjoyed because it was actually like a graphics based game.
Hmm.
The other 2 games that were on there were text based games, and I had immigrated to the U.S. like a year before, so my English wasn't very good, so I didn't know what to do with those games, right? Like I couldn't play them, so I ended up playing Jack Attack a lot. But eventually, I was like, what else can I do with this computer? So I learned some basic. My mom managed to find some teachers to teach me how to program. So that's how I got started. Programmed all through, elementary school, middle school, high
Hmm.
school. My second computer was an 8086 from Hyundai. They don't really make computers anymore, but back then they did. I had a 486 in high school. This was like the first of the 486 line by Intel. I think it was 33 megahertz. And like I first job out of college was for a startup, and it
Hmm.
was programming. A bunch of web services and things like that. And I did startups for about 15 years. Like
You've got quite
I
the roster of things you've worked on, I've got to say.
yeah, I've worked on everything, right? Like selling shoes online
Yeah.
to like, programming, electronic health records and,
Hmm. Yeah, I saw that
like,
too.
like just like all sorts of random stuff. I've done it all, right? Like I've tweaked like database queries. I've done like JavaScript optimization. I've done it all. But yeah, I discovered Bitcoin like back
Hmm.
at about 10 years ago, and yeah, I've been in it ever since, pretty much.
So I actually am curious, like, what would do you remember when you first heard of Bitcoin? Or is it like you had, but then you remember the time you took it seriously?
Oh, I remember the very first article that I read, and
Mm-hmm.
many of you guys may be familiar with the site Slashdot.
Uh-huh.
It's a geeky site. It's not as popular anymore. I think Hacker News is the place that most people go to now. But at least back then, it was like the place that I would check every day. Just let's scroll through the stories. Who's being a patent troll? What new Linux distribution exists, and stuff like that. And there's usually like graphics cards reviews and stuff like that for gamers as well. But the one story that I didn't know anything about, which is highly unusual, I usually at least know something about every story, was the story that said Bitcoin has reached dollar parity. And I
Mm-hmm.
was like, what does that even mean? I couldn't even parse the sentence, right? Because it's like, what does it mean to have dollar parity? Like, but it looks, this Bitcoin thing grew to be the size of a physical dollar or something. I don't know. So I looked into it and I found out that it's like some internet nerd money or something, which immediately
Yeah.
got me interested. And then I read about it and learned about it and found out about the 21 million limit. And that's what got me hooked, because I was like, oh, there's only 21 million. And I think there's like a human instinct to want to grab something scarce. And I'm
Yeah.
sure all your listeners know about this, right? If you're playing some online game or something, you want the absolute rarest thing. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter like how
Even if
good
it
it
may not
is.
be, if the orange weapon may not even be as good as some of your purple weapons, but God, you're just so
Yeah.
excited you got the orange one.
Yeah, you want the one of one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you want the rarest thing, even if it's not as good for you. That's the instinct that came over me, and that's ultimately like a human instinct for things that are scarce. So I ended up, trying to buy it. It was very difficult at the time. You had to. The
Yes,
only
it
real
was.
place was Mount Gox in Japan,
Which I
and
hear went well.
yeah, exactly. So you had to transfer your dollars to an exchange in Japan, and that wasn't easy. You had to use
Mm-hmm.
this other company called Dwala, and you had to like link your bank account to them, and they would do like two small deposits that you had to confirm, and that took like a week, and then you had to then like connect it to your Mount Gox account that you just opened, and they had to do verification and AML KYC or something, and then you could transfer that money to Mount Gox, and then after another week, then you can finally start trading. So I was like, that's too much work. Let's not do it. So I could have bought it $1,
Yeah.
but I didn't because it was way too annoying. Probably one of the biggest regrets of my life. But that's when I first heard about it.
And my story might be even dumber though. Like for sure it is,
Mm.
I think. When I heard about it in 2012, I don't even remember why I watched part of a YouTube video. I don't know what channel it was. I still don't know. But just like it was like probably some autoplay thing. And they're like, there's these gamers using their graphics cards to make money. And I had just gotten a
Mm.
high-end card. And I'm like, well, that sounds good to me. And so I looked
Mm.
into Bitcoin and I downloaded the Bitcoin QT wallet. And I had slow internet at our college at the time. They hadn't upgraded it yet. So I just saw this bar not moving fast. And I was just like, something must be wrong with this app. It won't sync to the network. Why is it taking so long? And I just deleted it and went away for a year.
Yeah, little did you know that was the blockchain being
Yes, I
downloaded.
didn't know what
It's
the
like many
blockchain
gigabytes of
was.
data.
And so I came back in late 2013 because, like I said earlier, like I was like, well, it still exists. So I should, I mean, it sounded crazy, but if it's still here 1 year later and it's a crazy idea, I really got to see what this is. And then I read the Bitcoin white paper and I was just like, oh, this could work. Like whoever wrote this seems to have really thought this out. And it didn't seem
Mm.
that complicated to me. It just seemed like there was really, and of course, behind the scenes it is, but really just a lot of thought put into how do we solve the problem of people copying anything digital. And to me, it really felt like they had really solved it. I mean, I guess this is a good time to ask this question, like in the most succinct way you can. And we've been dancing around it. Like, how would you describe what Bitcoin is if someone didn't know?
Digital gold. So it's digital in the sense that it's native to like bits and bytes that you normally have on the internet. But it's gold in the sense that it's decentralized. You don't need anyone's permission to go dig for gold. I could go dig for gold in my backyard right now. I'm probably not going to find any.
Probably not.
but I can do it. There's nothing really stopping me from doing that. This is very different than the U.S. dollar. If you are not the Treasury Department and you produce your own $100 bill, you will get arrested because the Secret Service doesn't like that. You need permission in order to go and make that. So that's the main difference. It's decentralized digital money, and it also happens to be perfectly scarce, which is something that we really haven't had. And it's
in human history,
usually,
like we
yeah,
haven't.
it's difficult for people to grasp because digital things up until 2008, when Satoshi Nakamoto invented Bitcoin, there were only two classes of things. It was infinitely copyable things or centralized but scarce things. So you had infinitely copyable things like MP3s and movies or whatever. You get perfect fidelity every time you copy them. But with centralized scarce stuff, it's like World of Warcraft gold or swords or even online coupons and things like that. Some central party controls what's going on, and they are the sole producer of whatever it is. So the difference between Bitcoin and those things is that it's both decentralized and digital and scarce, which we've never really had before, and that's the easiest way to describe that is digital gold.
Joaquim Hagen writes in and he asks, I just want to openly ask, how do you think someone came up with the Bitcoin idea and why has it gained value so much since the early days? And I really invited simple questions like that, so I know how simplistic that is.
Well, why has it gained value? It's gained value because it performs its functions as money really, really well. In my opinion, the reason why Bitcoin has gained so much of the value is because it is an excellent store of value. And this is one of the three functions of money. It's a medium of exchange, unit of account, and store of value. Thing about medium of exchange or method of payment is that there's a lot of those on the market. There's not only your credit cards and cash and checks and things like that, but there's also like Apple Pay, Google Wallet, Samsung Pay. And if you go to different countries, you get like WeChat in China, Octopus Card in Hong Kong, M-Pesa in Kenya and stuff like that. There's a lot of different sort of payment systems that are very fast and that work really, really well. But the thing that most people don't have, and this is largely due to sort of the economic policies of a lot of governments, is a good store of value, a good way to store value over a long period of time. So traditionally, the only two things that really compete, well, three things that compete with Bitcoin on that front are real estate, stocks, and gold. And those things go up in value at a pretty good rate, and they store value over time pretty well. Most people, the largest purchase that they ever make is their house, and it tends to store value over time because land, as they say, they're not really making any more of it, so it's very scarce. Similar thing with stocks, unless the company issues more shares for some reason or something like that. But usually there's a justification for it. But the thing about those is that they require a lot of investment in terms of time and research. If you're buying a stock, you're going to research like 400 stocks, right? Or maybe you're lazy, you end up using an index fund. This is what's caused more or less the index fund bubble and things like that. But there's also, a lot of switching costs as well. And certainly with real estate, there's a lot of research.
I'm dealing with it right now.
Especially if you're using it as an investment property or whatever. So those things aren't very good as stores of value because they also have utility. With stocks, you're supposed to get a dividend. With a house, you're supposed to get rent, or you're supposed to be able to live in it, or whatever. So there's, you're essentially taking away the utility value and making, adding a store of value premium to those. Bitcoin is a pure store of value, and gold served that purpose for a long time. It's just that there's a lot of shenanigans that are going on with gold. So if you study the gold market, for example. There's a lot of gold that doesn't exist that's floating out there in the market. And you might ask, how do they do this? Well, turns out that this is there's this thing called fractional reserve lending. So there's a bunch of gold vaults in the world, and the really big ones are in London, and I think there's one in India, and maybe one in Hong Kong. There's one in New York, but they have a lot of gold in their vaults. And the way people trade that gold is they just sort of move it around on their ledger, because to take
Yeah.
physical delivery of gold is very expensive. You have to hire armed guards or whatever and ensure the tracking and all that stuff, which nobody really wants to do. So they just keep it in the vault. So the bank vaults at some point were like, you know what, we have all this gold, we can go lend it out, and they do. They have lent out the gold, and at some point they go, okay, you know what? No one's actually going to redeem this gold, so we're going to lend out more gold than that exists. And this is how the first fractional reserve banks started,
Hmm.
and this continues to be the case today. So there's a lot of gold, GLD on like the Nasdaq or whatever.
Yeah.
That's actually like they're trading gold that doesn't exist. It's what the vaults say exists, but like no one's really redeeming them. So we don't know how much they're fractional reserve lending, but they just sort of create gold that doesn't exist. So this expands the supply, sort of keeping the price of gold down. What's different with Bitcoin is that because the transportation cost is so low, it's really essentially like sending an email. It's very fast and it doesn't weigh anything. It doesn't have a physical location and things like that. So it makes like possessing it and securing it also very, very cheap relative to something like gold, where you're going to want like steel enforced doors and like armed guards and motion detection machines and stuff like that. Instead, you have as essentially a secret that you keep on a hardware wallet device or something like that. It's relatively pretty affordable. So as a result of that, fractional reserve lending Bitcoin is very, very difficult, and the companies that do know that anyone can have a run at that quote unquote fractionally reserved bank at any time. So they are motivated to not fractionally reserve very much if they do, and generally it's considered unethical in the Bitcoin space. So as a result, what you get is a store of value that is very good, and this is what people have been looking for as a way, especially nowadays with inflation kind of running rampant and the dollar being such a poor store of value, as a way to store value over the long term. And you can see that it's grown as a result. It's I think on an annualized basis, it's something like 200% per year for the last 10 years, and that's an unheard of return in the financial world.
But yeah. So, anyways, and I think the first article I did on my website, long before I don't even know if I call myself big now, but I guess some, known by some in the gaming space, it was about Bitcoin. And the title of my article was actually, it's pretty long. Let me actually make sure I get it right. Is what you must understand first before you can truly understand Bitcoin. Because I feel like another thing, and you just touched on about half a dozen of the things that I touched on in it as well there. I think a lot of the apprehension is there. It's almost like, and this is going to trigger some people that I may use this term. Like, it's almost like you need to be deprogrammed, honestly, like to start actually taking Bitcoin seriously, because all of these things you said, like what makes a good money. And then you said Bitcoin is digital gold. You said gold, store of value, gaining value over time, not inflationary, deflationary. I feel like, just speaking for myself, no judgment, but I do believe I'm a little bit younger than you. But
yes,
but like it's like beaten into us in school that the number one thing a money needs to be is easily given away. Like, and if you really think about it, for even just like the Bitcoin white paper made me just take 5 minutes to think about it. If you think about it for just 5 minutes, that's clearly not true. People want what's rare. People want what gains value, and they trade things that lose value for things that gain value. This isn't even like a monetary theory. This is common sense. You trade less value for more value. And for something to really last and gain popularity, it has to be perceived as something that will bring you value in the future, not lose you value. Otherwise, we'd all be using the Brazilian, real or something instead of the US dollar. And we wouldn't be, I'm moving to Nashville. I can assure you the real estate market's doing quite well there. Like, it's, the houses would not be they'd probably be worth about at least half as much as they are now if it wasn't clearly I mean, maybe most of the reason someone might buy a house there is because they know it will acquire value. And I think one thing you touched on, and I might have heard you say this before in an interview, I've heard other people bring this up at the very least, is that in a world where Bitcoin is at least some sort of standard, maybe not everything, but something that you can go to easily, it might make it easier to save money for a lot of people because there's just less research involved. It's just, where do I store my money? Oh, there's a good stock. AMD seems like a good investment. Maybe I should put some into that. That's okay. That's always going to be there. No one's saying stocks are going away. No one's saying real estate's going away. There's always going to be good deals, but maybe you're tired that night and you just want to store it in gold or a digital gold.
Yeah, and this is the thing. All of that time and effort that you put into researching and things like that, they're not going towards actually you producing something for civilization, right?
Right.
Creating goods and services.
The amount of hours I put into looking at houses recently, it's kind of fun, to be honest. But I mean, but I could have been making more videos for my supporters instead of looking at houses.
And this is the thing, like for a lot of richer people, if you know anyone that's really rich, they spend way too much time trying to keep their wealth. And this is the thing. These are some of the most productive people, right? They produce something that a lot of people like. They've made a lot of money. And now to keep their wealth, they have to almost do a full-time job. In fact, there are entire things called family offices. I don't know if you know what those are. But family offices, which are basically investment arms of an entire family, right?
Yeah.
Like, you might be like the Rockefellers or something like that. You have like billions of dollars and you want to make sure that you invest it. So you hire like 10 investment professionals to make sure that the money stays. And oftentimes they're, like LPs to venture funds and hedge funds. And, they have an allocation to various equities and real estate and things like that. It's a full-time job.
Yeah.
It's a lot of time and effort that goes into that. Now, if instead of doing all of that and sort of like having a full-time job, just keeping your wealth, instead the wealth was kept for you just in one asset, like Bitcoin or something like that. And this did happen under the gold standard from 1870 to 1910. You have a lot more freedom to like go and make other things for everybody else. And on a per capita basis, from 1870 to 1910, we had way more innovation than we did afterwards on a per capita basis because there was a lot more room for doing that. Once the Federal Reserve came and you had to work very hard to keep your wealth, it became this thing where a lot of people just kind of stopped producing after they had their one hit, right? Like, I made my money, now I have to keep it, so that's going to be my full-time job. Which unfortunately has happened to a lot of people. Yeah,
I mean, a personal example I can give is, the first things I mined were Litecoin, and I would always make sure to put some of it into Bitcoin because I was just like, well, that seems like the default, so I should probably use this. As before I fully understood it, to be honest. And then I got into what was called Darkcoin that then became Dash. That actually, say what you will about it. I have a Dash jacket that I look at, and I know it's funny, right? But you know what? I was $2 when I got into it. It was a very good decision, But I did sell it in I don't remember, 2018, 2019. That turned out to be an equally good decision too when I got into it. And I remember I had this little chart. I don't know why, for fun, I made this chart. What am I making? What am I putting into my house? What are my assets? Just I kind of made like an asset monitoring Excel file for fun. And I had 20 stocks and 10 different cryptocurrencies. And eventually especially when I got into this YouTube channel and podcasting really taking off, it takes up so much of my time because it's everything. I'm building it. I'm doing it all myself, planning, shooting, editing it. I didn't have time to worry about things anymore. And I sold off all of my altcoins simply because I was tired of paying attention to when they're going to go up. And I was just like, the amount of time I take worrying about if this stock or this is going to go up, I'm tired. I've got stuff to do. And I just don't want to have that in the back of my head. Oh, should I have sold Monero at this time or not? I don't care anymore. And I do wonder if people understand how much stress they're getting subconsciously from worrying about if their money's going to lose value if they don't do something with it. So much of like you said, the time even at middle class and even lower class spends worrying about if their money's in the right place. It is a profound waste of time that's probably almost impossible to quantify. And I don't see anyone make that argument really. Like you make that one a lot, but I haven't heard a lot of people make that. But it's a good point.
Yeah, it's the thing that most people spend their time and money on. Like if I go into like these clubhouse rooms, half the people are saying, "Oh, should I get into trading and like all these altcoins and stuff?" I'm like, you have no idea how much of this is going to take over your life, and there's an opportunity cost here. If you're spending all of that time researching and trying to figure out like when the signal is to sell or buy or whatever, that's time taken away from you possibly like providing value elsewhere. So unless your trading is so good that you can make up for all
in
of that,
some people it is,
earn.
But it's a very few amount, to be honest, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's like literally 1% of traders versus the 99% that are the suckers and lose money and so on. So for me, like time is much better spent, like just going and working or, doing whatever job, even working at McDonald's, whatever, right? Like going and earning money and then putting that into Bitcoin is a way easier way to accumulate wealth than, like trying to trade and like play all these like zero-sum games where there's a very good possibility that you might lose. There's actual value that you can add for sure by going and working and providing your labor or goods or services that you can produce in the market. There's a lot of that out there. So why not do that and use that to, add money to your stack?
Yeah. Let's just admit it. Nobody wants to pay full price for those Windows 10 professional keys. But shopping for deals on eBay can be a risky process that wastes your time, which is why you should simply just go to cdkoffers.com. cdkoffers.com offers an assortment of Windows software products, Steam games, Origin games, Uplay games, and even games on Xbox and PlayStation. Help out Moore's Law is Dead and save yourself some money by using offer code BrokenSilicon for 25% off all Windows software and Die Shrink for 3% off everything on the website. Use CDK offers today. Sebastian F. writes in and asks, okay, this will probably be a dumb question, but I know very little about crypto. Given it would take ages to mine the entirety of the remaining Bitcoin, what will be the actual usable supply when mining for it will essentially stop? Also, how much of it is known to have been lost, destroyed? And bonus question, why must some coins be mined and others, like Ripple, are instantly available? Again, I apologize about these super basic questions. And then he has another question at the end, which is, what do you see as the biggest misconception by the general public with regards to the Bitcoin blockchain? And I would say I saw a few, but I'm glad he asked the question.
Yeah, there's a bunch of questions there. Let me answer the last one first. Biggest misconception. Biggest misconception is that this is technology, not money. And those two things have profoundly different properties. So for a lot of people, especially in technology, they tend to view everything through a technological lens. So for example, if you're getting a new graphics card, you want the one that, is faster, has more features or uses this new protocol or new bus or, fan design or something like that, right? Like bells and whistles matter in technology. Features matter in technology. And that's how a lot of people tend to view crypto. It's like, okay, well, Bitcoin does this, but this other coin does this, and this. And they don't realize that the way to evaluate this is not as a technology. It's not a Facebook. It's not Myspace. It's not the Model T. It's not any of that. It's money, and money has very, very different properties. It is not about bells and whistles or features or something like that. So let me just give you sort of like a thought experiment to chew on a little bit. So if you think about the U.S. dollar, it is essentially created by the Fed, and they control how much money supply there is, and they've generally been expanding at about a 7% clip since 1959. They've also added a lot of features to the U.S. dollar, right? The ACH clearing system came on in the 70s, so that
Mm-hmm.
banks could settle with each other within 3 days and so on. They're talking now about central bank digital currencies, which would add even more features to the dollar. Something like maybe like 20-minute settlement, something to that effect.
That would be
faster
nice.
transactions. Like they could make it available on your phone, and you can use your phone to pay for things or something like that. They could make all of that available. Now, would that still make people want to keep their money in dollars? I would say no. And the
No.
reason is because they can still expand it whenever they want. They could add all of the features that all of these other things have. It wouldn't matter. It's not about the features. The thing that matters most for money is credible long-term scarcity. And the US dollar simply does not have that. And if you look at the history of money, this has always been the case. So salt used to be used as money. This is where we get the word salary, right? Salt, sal. That's where we get that. But salt is no longer used as money. Why? Because people figured out ways to mine tons of it at a time, right? Like there were all these salt mines and stuff like that. So they figured it out. And as soon as the market flooded with salt, well, you can't really use it as money because it doesn't have credible long-term scarcity. Similar thing with glass beads, wampums, rhinestones. The only thing that has sort of like kept up in that regard is gold. And it's been used as money for something like 6,000 years because no one's figured out ways to go produce large amounts of it. In fact,
Not without expending a ton of energy, at least.
Right. And there was an entire science, quote unquote, in the Renaissance called alchemy, where people were trying to make gold, right? Because it was that valuable. And that's why gold has kept its value or kept its monetary property, because it has that credible long-term scarcity. Now, Bitcoin over the last 12 years has had that credible long-term scarcity. The US dollar has really only been fiat money since 1971, when Nixon cut the ties of convertibility for dollars to gold. So it's really only 50 years old as a fiat currency. Bitcoin is 12 years old, but it also trades 24/7, 365. So in a sense, Bitcoin is getting closer to the dollar in terms of age. Now, all of these other coins, right? The one that came out last week or something like that, none of them have that credible long-term scarcity. You just can't, because you're not old enough. You haven't gone through all of the different, like sort of trials and tribulations that would prove that you can last a long time. Bitcoin has, it's lasted 12 years. So the longer it lasts, the more credibility it gets, the higher the price goes. Whereas with all of this other stuff, like Ethereum has a crazy monetary policy that goes all over the place.
Whatever Vitalik wants is their monetary
it's essentially
policy.
Whatever Vitalik wants. And that's why I call them like essentially, digital fiat currencies, right? Like they're not very different than fiat in the sense that there's some central controller. But with Bitcoin, you have 12 years of history, right? Of it continuing that 21 million limit. It was known at the beginning, and it's been there the entire time. That credible long-term scarcity is what matters, and it has there's a network effect and all of this other stuff that goes into it. But this is why we have to look at Bitcoin differently than these other ones. Now, the guy had a few other questions.
Well, yeah, like one was, what about mining? Like when you run out of coins, which is, it's just you pay a transaction fee, and already miners are getting quite a bit of the money they mine in a block is now transaction fees for sending the coin.
Right. So it's right now 6.25 Bitcoins for the block subsidy. This is the new Bitcoins that are coming into the market. And about 0.75 to 1.25 Bitcoins in transaction fees. These are fees that people that are sending transactions on the network pay the miners. And that ends up being about 0.75 to 1.25. So already something like 15% of miner revenue is already in fees. A couple of halvings from now, so about 7 years from now, I would guess that it's going to be the fees are going to overtake
Yeah.
the block subsidy. At which point, that's how it'll work. It's what we would call the fee market. And if you think about it from an economic perspective, every time you inflate the currency, which essentially Bitcoin is being inflated to some degree every 10 minutes, a small amount, but it is being inflated. So currently there's about 18.5 million Bitcoins, but every 10 minutes, 6.25 new Bitcoins come into existence. You could sort of think of that as a tax on all the holders, right? Because you're being diluted just a little bit every time new blocks are found. So in a way, the holders are paying for about 85% of the security of the blockchain, whereas the rest, the 15%, are being paid by the people that are actually transacting. As Bitcoin ages, what you're doing is taking the burden of securing the blockchain from the holders, and instead of extracting value from the holders, you're making the people that are actually transacting pay for it, which I think is a much more just way of doing things. Instead of taxing through inflation, you're taxing the people that are consuming the resource, which is the blockchain. So,
well, you've said that a few times too. I think we need to jump into that just for 30 seconds. Like, thinking about how inflation is in many ways a tax on the middle class, effectively. I mean, they add more money every year and your money has less value. And you go, no, it doesn't. Okay, well, games are more expensive. Your graphics cards are more expensive. Gas is more expensive and housing is more expensive. So as long as you don't want to play anything, live anywhere, or travel, you're right. Things are the same price, I guess, in your world. But no, inflation's real. And it's created by the government, and it tends to go to the people closer to the top first, and they don't feel it as hard as you do. Like, you can say it's not a problem, but I don't know. There's a lot of, I would disagree that it is effectively a way, they didn't raise taxes to pay for this bailout. Yeah, they did. They're just taxing you a different way.
It's inflation is stealth taxation. It's taxation without representation. At least with explicit taxes, Congress actually has to pass a law, and they have to actually go and collect it.
Yeah.
With inflation, what you end up getting is their ability. They can just sort of tax without any legislation whatsoever, without any transparency whatsoever. They just sort of do it, and we find out about it much later. And it's not only U.S. citizens that are getting screwed as a result of this.
No.
Because at least we have the right to vote, right? We theoretically put the people in office that make these decisions, that establish the Federal Reserve, and the Fed chairman apparently reports to Congress and things like that. But if you're somebody in Nigeria or North Korea that's using dollars to store value, and plenty of them are, believe me, right? They don't have any say in U.S. politics. Yet they are being diluted, right? Their dollar's not worth as much, and it's kind of crazy to think about it. But the currency that's most desired by North Koreans is the U.S. dollar. Despite thinking of U.S. people as imperialist scum or something like that, they want dollars because they know this is hard money. At least,
or it's harder money than other alternatives.
Yeah, than what they're able to get. And unsurprisingly, these are the people that get screwed the most. So every time inflation happens in the US, right? Every time the central bank expands by a couple $1 trillion because the government doesn't have that much in tax revenue, so they end up buying the treasuries and essentially print that money into existence. You're not just stealing from everybody in the US. Actually, most of the money that you're stealing is abroad, right? It's all of these central banks that are holding treasuries as reserve. It's all of these people in poorer countries that are using the US dollar as their store of value. You're stealing from them. And that is profoundly immoral. And in any other century, this would be called tribute. Right,
you could make the argument it's a way of just getting tribute.
It is because they're being forced to pay for the excesses of whatever we're doing. This is exactly what the Roman government used to do. This was why Rome was so rich. They would extract tribute from all of these cities, and basically Rome was very decadent as a result, and all these other places were very poor. And ultimately, what ends up happening is that those places enter into hyperinflation way faster than the U.S. does. And
Hmm.
even some place like Canada, like someone was showing me a picture of how much meat costs in Canada. And they showed me like a 1.3 kilogram thing of ribeyes, right?
Hmm.
Which is about 2.5 pounds of
Yeah.
ribeye, 60 Canadian dollars, which is kind
Oh
of
my
like
God.
insane. And they were also saying, yeah, and the butter costs $8.
Oh
So
my
like
God.
inflation is happening. It
Yeah.
happens more at the edges. We're more at the center. If you're in the U.S., you're much more at the center, and you are because the U.S. is able to export inflation because of the demand for dollars abroad and so on. So you're seeing places like Turkey have like 20% interest rates at their banks and things like that. They're
Hmm.
going to enter hyperinflation soon. You see places like Nigeria where the naira is like diluted by 50% or something like that over the last year. They're going to enter hyperinflation. All of these places are going to enter hyperinflation first because they're using the dollar as a store of value, which is a very crappy store of value. Um,
But it's better than using a lot of other currencies, and that's why they all
right,
want
right.
it.
Because the dollar has this exorbitant privilege, we're going to probably feel it absolutely last.
Hmm.
But it's happening. We're even seeing it in lumber, in computer chips, graphics cards, and everything else. All of that is happening, and at some point, once that cycle kind of gets triggered, well, all of the prices go up. And this happened in the 70s, like where prices were
Yeah.
going up significantly. And we're probably going to enter that at some point. It's difficult to tell exactly when, but you can't keep spending trillions of dollars without zero effect on the economy. The economy adjusts, and there's a new equilibrium that will happen. And if you're not prepared for that, then it's going to be pretty rough times for you.
I mean, yeah, I just tell people be mentally prepared for everything to be twice as expensive in 10 years. Like, I think
Mm.
that's
Not even 10 years, man. I
probably
don't
not
think
even
it's going to
10
take
years.
that
I'm trying
much.
to, I'm trying to be in the middle of like, people like just taking it and mentally preparing themselves. You look at the prices of something in the early 80s to the late 60s, yeah, they doubled. I mean, a lot of things got vastly more expensive. Another thing that I think can be part of the misconceptions, Morbilar writes in and asks, what do you do with the sluggishness and high cost of Bitcoin transactions? And I wrote down, I would make the argument that if you're finding Bitcoin transactions sluggish or expensive, you're using an outdated app or method to send it. Honestly, at this point, is my opinion. It's a bit harsh, but I don't know. It's like instant for me. And most websites have a way of telling if the transaction is going to confirm ahead of time, just like a credit card, by the way, guys.
Mm.
And it's instant, even without using the Lightning Network. And if you use the Lightning Network, it's so quick. I don't.
Mhm.
You just have to use it.
Yeah, I mean, the person's probably talking about on-chain confirmations, and that taking like 10, 20, 30 minutes sometimes, and during high fee environments, much longer. But I mean, that's part of the design. You have to understand that the blockchain is a community resource, and every node that runs it has to have the entire blockchain in order to validate the whole thing. And if you make the size of the blocks too big so you could fit more transactions and so on, it's a tax on everybody in the system that's actually self-sovereign and validates the ledger on their own. But that said, like the thing is, like there already are lots of layer two solutions like Lightning that you
Hmm.
just mentioned. There's also, I think, a possibility that we'll get a lot of other companies that are going to settle in Bitcoin. We know, for example, Mastercard and Visa are looking heavily into Bitcoin right now. And the thing is, both those companies they settle in like 40 different currencies already, right? Like they
Yeah.
settle in the dollar, the euro, the yen, the yuan, and many others. All they have to do is turn on a switch and say, all right, we'll also settle in Bitcoin. Bam! Now you can use like your credit card to settle everything in Bitcoin, and you're all good. Like there are many things like that where the financial infrastructure that already exists can sort of like slide the dollar out and slide Bitcoin in, and you would more or less have a smooth transition from one to the other. Because at some point, if prices are going up fast enough in the dollar, no one's going to want dollars, right? Like this is kind of what happens.
The
in
number
Venezuela.
one thing Bitcoin needs to be, I think, is something that is deflationary. And then the number two thing is stable and decentralized. That's it. You have to have a reason to want it. For good or for worse, by the way, the coin that gains the most value and is the most stability, that's what people are going to buy. Even if in some idyllic world, some other thing with all these features could maybe you argue theoretically do that. It's like, but they're not Bitcoin. That is what Bitcoin's doing. And after that, the speed is so much less important on the base layer than just making it stable. Your money can't have bugs, right?
You can't move fast and break things when people's money is at stake. And that's the unfortunate reality that we've seen from like a lot of Ethereum bugs and things like that. Like people lose like millions of dollars because, oh, whoops. Yeah, sorry about that. Like we forgot to patch that. So yeah, Bitcoin, I think, can be that settlement layer. And, it's more important that it's hard money and it's absolutely scarce. Again, that long-term credible scarcity is what makes money valuable. And if you lose that in any way, by centralizing it and things like that, then it's going to be a worse money. And that's not a good trade-off.
Well, and, one thing I've heard before that I think is a good point is, if something's valuable, if people want it, as long as they know it will always be there and be stable, they'll find a way to transact it, right? And ultimately, the 10-minute confirmation time, really, this is more of like an argument I heard mostly in 2014. That was when all the confirmation time wars were, I would argue. Like, it is arguably instant just as much as a credit card is already. I'm not going to get into the technical reasons why, but the 10-minute confirmation is it. There's just ways we can go about it where it is basically instant, and those ways are more efficient than trying to do it at the base level. Because if you think about it, this 10-minute confirmation time, like I don't know how big the blockchain is now for Bitcoin. I think like 250 gigabytes, maybe it's at 300. I don't know. But I don't know what Ethereum's at. I think it's at like 10 terabytes or something, and so if you think about it, who has room for 300 gigabytes? Well, most people now, actually. It's conceivable that because we only have like 1 megabyte blocks, arguably bigger because of SegWit. Not going to get into that either.
Well, what you store on disk is definitely more than one because, it was a block size increase. Yeah.
Okay. So, but hard drives are kind of catching up with it. And because we've limited it, that means it's conceivable, I think, phones will be fast enough in a few years to just run a full bit. Well, I think they already are.
A phone.
Yeah, they already are.
Yeah. The Exodus phone, I think, by HTC, they run a full Bitcoin node on one of those.
Yeah, so you can run a full node that is helping keep the network honest on a phone, meaning there's so many nodes keeping the network decentralized. With Ethereum, it went to 1 terabyte. Well, okay, now most gaming PCs can maybe handle that if they put an extra hard drive in. And then you go to 2, 10. At a certain point, there's like 20 people who are actually holding Ethereum nodes, and that's not decentralized. And the decentralization,
it's much less than 20. I think the archival nodes, I think there's like maybe 1 or 2 in the entire world. It's kind of horrible.
That's worse than the central banking system, I would argue.
Yeah, it is. And like no one knows like how many Ethereum there are and things like that. It's a complete technical mess. Yeah.
I don't know if you want to answer this. What do you think is going to happen to Ethereum over the next year? I'm wondering because you consult on this stuff, so I wonder if you'd say.
Yeah, hard to say because they're getting a fresh supply of new people that are coming in because they're very good at marketing, and this is something that Ethereum has been good at from the very beginning. They're very good at raising up hopes and getting people to believe in their newest narrative and so on. And right now, their thing is NFTs and DeFi. I think those are the two sort of narratives going on Ethereum. I do think that there is an NFT bubble. So at some point it'll pop and that's going to completely go away. And like DeFi, I think there's a pretty big bubble there as well. And once those things are no longer really there, that'll take a lot of the transactions off of Ethereum, and They're also transitioning to Ethereum 2.0. I mean, they'll probably be around, but I don't think their performance against Bitcoin will be that great. So that's been the case with every altcoin. Like if you look at like a 5-year chart, Bitcoin against almost anything, they all do pretty horribly, and for good reason, because Bitcoin is sound money and all of these things are not.
Well, and this is, I can't pretend to have paid much attention to it for the past few years. I used to pay a little attention to Ethereum, but I know they're trying to migrate to proof of stake, and they're going to do
Hmm.
something called sharding, which, as far as I may, I'm not. I study mechanical engineering, not anything having to do with computer science. But my
Hmm.
understanding is they're going to basically have this like branching off blockchains that then remerge every now and then, and that's how they'll spread out all of the terabytes of data being used. It sounds really complicated and hard to do. Like,
It is.
do you think they're going to successfully migrate to proof of stake and sharding?
I don't know. That's a really good question, and it really depends on your definition of success. Will they have some product that exists? Probably. Will it work well? Probably not. Sharding itself is, from a computer science perspective, extremely difficult because you're taking a giant database, which is essentially Ethereum's blockchain, and putting it into smaller silos. And it works fine within a silo because it's
Mm-hmm.
smaller and you get more throughput and stuff. But as long as you have two different silos and you have to figure out how those interact, it gets much more complicated, and that's what they're trying to work through and figure out how to do. But like, this is what I'll say about Vitalik. Like, he was like 19 years old when he thought of Ethereum and stuff, and everybody sort of like says he's a genius or whatever. I've seen his code. He's not a genius. Thing is, like, his tendency is to be sort of like the programmer that's just out of college, and I've managed a lot of them over my career as a programmer. And their tendency is very much like, oh, you know what, I can do something better, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna go create my own thing. I'm not gonna
It's
look at the
somewhat
stuff
commendable,
that's.
trying to do something better and bigger.
Yeah, yeah, but they have like zero respect for like the hardening that like putting something out in production does.
Mm-hmm.
So they're like, oh, you know what, I'm gonna make my own thing, and that's been his thing the entire time, right? Like, you look at a lot of the design choices in Ethereum, a lot of those things are the same way, and I'll give you just one small example.
Okay.
So, for example, Bitcoin has an address format. It was, at least back then, it was base 58, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
this is the addresses that start with a 1 or a 3. And it's upper and lowercase letters except for 0, L, capital O, and one other one, which I can't remember. But it's a bunch of letters and numbers, and it kind of looks like gobbledygook. But there's something at the end that is essentially a checksum. And that checksum exists so that if you mistranscribe it, right? Like,
Yeah.
you turn a lowercase k into an uppercase k by accident or something like that.
Those elaborate Bitcoin addresses that I know anyone who first gets into Bitcoin is scared to type it in wrong. You can't, right? You can't type it in wrong. It won't let you, really. Almost any app
Yeah,
won't
yeah.
let
So
you.
if you try to type it in wrong, if you type it in wrong and get it wrong, the checksum is sort of your validator. So the wallet knows exactly right away that, hey, you entered this wrong. Can you check everything?
Mm-hmm.
And then you can go over it and actually check it again. So that checksum exists for a very good reason. Vitalik, in all his wisdom, decided, you know what, I'm going to ditch this base 58 format, and we're going to do these Ethereum addresses. And if you have an Ethereum address, you know that it starts with 0x. And it's a bunch of pseudo hexadecimal or something like that. It's very hard to quantify. But of course, he left out the checksum in the address. So if you mistype a single letter or
Ugh.
number, it goes like, no wallet knows that there's something wrong. So a lot of Ethereum has essentially gone like missing because people typed the address wrong, and there's no way to get those back. And like, this is the sort of thing I'm talking about. These are horrible
This is
design
very
decisions.
basic. Like, can you imagine if your bank account, you put the wrong number in, and not only did it not go to the wrong account, it just burned your US dollars?
Yeah. Yeah, it's design choices that a new grad would make. and I think he dropped out of college, so he maybe new grad is being too generous for him. But like it's just kind of like stuff that any experienced software engineer would know. Okay, that's not a good idea. Like he does anyway. And sharding is very much like that. Proof of stake is very much like that. All of this stuff has a lot of very good reasons not to do. There's a reason why you don't see it in other places. But he thinks he's a genius because everyone tells him he's a genius because, like he created Ethereum and, there's, it's got a market cap of however many $billion. So therefore he must be a genius and therefore he can do no wrong. This is the sort of cult of Ethereum that really rankles me because as a software engineer, it's like,
but I understand.
Guys, I don't think he knows what he's doing.
Well, I mean, all I can say is when I look at the size of the Ethereum blockchain and, these ambitious things they're trying to do, it's like, okay, I'm not going to risk my money in that, though, because I know, and I don't want to make any bets because it's made it this far, but I just don't want to be there if it, I honestly, truly think it's conceivably possible there will just be 1 month at some point where all of a sudden the the Ethereum blockchain just disintegrates. Like something goes wrong or like the transition to sharding just breaks it. And it's like, I'm not putting my money in that. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Pipeman writes in with a pretty good question, I think. And he says, very rarely is the first version of a new technology the last or best version. How will Bitcoin compete with innovators that improve on all of its core properties while also maintaining decentralization and security? What qualities would you have to see in an alternative to consider it over Bitcoin? And I brought this one up because I know you don't even like making the Facebook MySpace argument, which, I mean, really, it's not a direct comparison. That's fair. But I think people see Bitcoin and they go, well, that must be the MySpace. What's going to be the Facebook? And they forget about Beans, Bitcoin, BitGold, Flues.com. There were attempts to make something like Bitcoin all through the 90s and early 2000s, guys. I think I would make the argument that Bitcoin is the Facebook, and what you're looking at with Ethereum is Google+. Like, there's been MySpaces before Bitcoin. But I don't know. How would you answer that question?
Yeah, I mean, this is, again, sort of looking through the lens of technology instead of money. The one property that's most important is not something that you can just will into existence, and that's credible long-term scarcity. You can't just throw that in as a feature of a new blockchain because ultimately what you need to do is last longer. And Bitcoin's already lasted 12 years. You ain't going to catch up. Now, I mean, maybe there's some other way that you can, gain credibility about that in some weird form somehow. I can't really even think of it in like a metaphysical sense, but maybe there is. If there is, then it's going to have to be something like crazy different and crazy, like at least orders of magnitude, better than Bitcoin. I haven't seen anything that's even like 5% better than Bitcoin. So there you go.
In terms of the principles you believe matters, right? Like decentralization, stability.
Yeah, and you can't just throw on decentralization as a feature either. If you create it, it's by nature centralized, right? You created it. You're the single point of failure and so on. And we've seen this with a lot of Bitcoin forks. It's like, well, we have Bitcoin's history, therefore we're decentralized. No, you're not. As soon as you've taken it over, Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin SV, and Bitcoin Diamond and many others, like they end up, completely centralized. Like decentralization is very hard to gain and very easy to lose. So, ultimately, like, saying, oh, there's going to be a new blockchain that has decentralization and all these additional features. First of all, it doesn't matter. And second of all, it's not going to be decentralized. And I
think there's some luck involved, right? And like that Bitcoin was created by people that aren't in charge of it. That's something you can't just duplicate. And I know a lot of altcoin projects are like, here's the 10-year plan for the developers stepping away from the project so it's decentralized. And it's like, but it just never seems to happen. And if they do, someone else just hijacks it and makes themselves the new god of that currency. I saw that happen with Dash, honestly. Like that was one that I like because the developer kind of did it as an experiment and then stopped working on it. But then this new thing just shows up and becomes the new kings of that altcoin. And it's because, like, if you're not the original one, if you're not Bitcoin with that history, the only way to really keep getting known is proof of news, just throwing out news constantly. And so I think it could be possible for something to pop up with the tenets of Bitcoin that also has other features, but there's no incentive for them to survive in the short term without proof of news. And the only thing that gets you proof of news is a bunch of scammers basically running it, is the argument I would make.
Yeah. Essentially, you have to have a centralized entity to create the news right, in the first place. And so it's kind of a self-defeating thing. Bitcoin had almost an immaculate birth, and you're not going to be able to replicate that. I'm sorry.
Carbon Cry writes in and asks, what would both of you say to the people being outraged by how much crypto and blockchain technology is killing our planet by causing global warming, et cetera, et cetera? I know it's mostly a bullshit concern, but there are people who really think crypto is hugely damaging to our environment or whatnot. How would you answer this question?
I think it's been great for the environment, and they don't realize how like power generation and things like that work. Everything is optimized for availability. If you think about it with your house, if suddenly you didn't have power for a few hours, you would call the power company and say, what the heck's going on? So what the power company does is they generate enough power for peak demand. So, recently in Texas, we had this, like winter storm and things like that. There was not enough power to supply. And that's considered a huge disaster because the power grid basically didn't have the capacity for the peak demand that we actually had. So the design of a power grid is such that you're supposed to produce way more than is needed, so that you're continuously supplying all these places with power, because oftentimes these are in hospitals and things like that, where there's like life support equipment. So it's more important that you have the power available than that it gets consumed. So what ends up happening in the electrical grid is that there's a lot of places where you kind of burn off power. You waste energy. And guess what?
They just throw it away.
You just throw it away. And the thing is, these are exactly the places where the Bitcoin miners go and take that energy. And instead of having that energy essentially thrown away, you're using it for mining and securing the Bitcoin network. Now, how does this help the environment? Well, it subsidizes essentially a lot of renewable energy that's coming into play. So, for example, hydroelectric dams have enormous capacity. They can generate lots and lots of electricity. The problem is that nobody really likes to live near a dam, and for good reason. You might get flooded if the dam breaks or something like that. So, if you're living kind of far away from the dam, the dam has to supply the electricity to that city. It's that transmission, you lose a lot of power and you end up having to charge a lot of money because you have to also build the infrastructure to go in between and so on. Ultimately, what ends up happening is that most of the capacity or a large portion of the capacity of the electricity that's generated by the hydroelectric dam doesn't end up getting used. So guess what? Bitcoin miners come, and this is happening all over China. They come and take that extra electricity. Now the dam is more profitable because they're getting extra revenue that they would have just burned off, right? Like that they wouldn't have used at all. And similar things with wind farms and solar panels and things like that. Because the electricity generation is intermittent and so on, they're able to, they like solar panels generate way more energy during the day than, and none at night. So what ends up happening is that when they have excess electricity, they're able to pipe it into these Bitcoin miners. And now because you can sell to the Bitcoin miners where no one else would want it, now you can subsidize, you're making more profit. The time to profitability for all of these green energy initiatives are much faster. So you end up subsidizing all of these because Bitcoin mining is portable. You could bring it to the place. And that's a unique
You can't
property.
bring a city to a power plant. Not quickly.
And like for a long time, the only thing that could take a lot of energy away and like was extremely energy intensive was aluminum processing. And if you know about that, the energy industry, pretty much wherever there was a lot of excess electricity, that's where aluminum plants would pop up because it was just so energy intensive. But now with Bitcoin, it's a lot easier to absorb a lot of that electricity. Now, no one was talking about like, aluminum production is very bad for the environment like 40 years ago. But they're only doing that because, mainstream journalists don't know what the hell they're talking about with respect to how energy is used or what the capacity is or whatever. They just go, okay, well, Bitcoin takes this much energy and, that's as much as this city or this country or something like that. They have no idea how it works or why all this excess energy is generated and what would happen to that energy if the Bitcoin miners weren't there. And so they have no understanding of the actual economics or the market. And unfortunately, a lot of people believe that. They just think, okay, well, this bit of energy is the same as this other bit of energy that I'm using to, power the lights on in my house. And it's like, no, they're not equivalent. One would have been, wasted unless it was used. Yours is being demanded and you're paying good money for it. And that's why they built the entire plant for you. So if anything, the fact that you need lights on in your house is a much worse thing for the environment than Bitcoin mining ever will be. And it just rankles me because it's a very dishonest and completely stupid argument that a lot of environmentalists make about that.
Well, and I don't even know how many environmentalists are doing it so much as it's an easy article title. Bitcoin now uses the energy of Norway. Everyone's going to click on that. You're going to get clicks. You'll get some environmentalists who don't read past the headline, frankly, mad. And you'll get everyone, spamming that in the comments. Well, it's killing the environment. And, I think there's an argument you could be made that if Bitcoin somehow would have popped up in the 70s when we didn't really use, or I don't know, maybe the 50s is a better way to put it, before we really used any renewable energy, maybe it would have been worse. But Bitcoin's coming online in a time where green energy is the cheapest energy. And if you, like you said, if you actually look at the energy being used in any of these mining farms, it's in Iceland, it's in the Pacific Northwest, it's in places with a lot of solar. It's almost all mining firms I've seen are next to renewable energy, and they're making it more profitable to innovate renewable energy as well, because that's already the cheapest one. Like, I don't think any mining firm is just like, God, we've got to find where they're using coal because coal is so cheap. No one's doing that. They're going next to hydroelectric plants. And I know of several instances where a dormant hydroelectric plant was turned back online for miners and then started using some of the excess energy with no emissions to power a town. Like, I really think you could make the argument that this will just cause more innovation in green energy over time.
Well, of course it will, because they're more profitable. You have another revenue source. I mean, if you can sell to more people and sell for 2 cents what you would have gotten for 0 or -1 because you had to spend money to burn that energy somewhere, like it's a very good thing. And I like, a lot of people just don't understand how energy works or what's actually.
And I don't blame them half the time, because Bitcoin is very easy to quantify. Try quantifying the amount of money spent by the banking system, printing money, housing their databases, clearing with gold every now and then, paying armed guards, starting wars in countries. That's a lot of energy being wasted there. It's just not easy to quantify. And because Bitcoin has a network difficulty, we can basically just reverse engineer it and tell you how much energy it's using. And so it's an easy target. It's an easy target for clickbait articles is honestly the argument I would make.
Yeah, and I hope clickbait articles go away as a result of Bitcoin, because that would be awesome.
I'm not going to predict that's going away anytime soon. QH Freddy writes in and asks, where do you think we will see the current iteration of cryptocurrencies go? Is there some aspect that should be changed, something that should be added? Maybe phrased differently, what are the problems with the current iterations of crypto that you believe need to be addressed?
I don't think anything needs to be addressed. It's a fantastic innovation, and it's nothing needs to change for Bitcoin to succeed. It's already going to succeed. It's already succeeded in many ways. So, in a sense, could particular things be improved? Yeah, certainly privacy is a big one. I think a lot of people
That's
would
another
like more
question,
privacy.
What would
Yeah.
you improve? Privacy is one of them.
Yeah, and there are privacy technologies that already exist, but economically incentivizing it with something like cross-input signature aggregation, which may come up in the next soft fork or something like that, would be amazing, and that would enhance Bitcoin. But like nothing needs to necessarily happen to Bitcoin, or things don't necessarily need improvement. Like it's kind of like asking, what could gold do to improve its properties? It's like it's already
Not become
exists, dude.
silver.
Yeah, and like it's basically like the way Bitcoin works is just fine. I don't think you need to go around trying to improve it. This is again looking through the lens of technology instead of money. Money is better when it stays the same. Technology is better when it's continuously improving.
So I think one of the final discussion points that I think would be pretty interesting, Bunjaman brings this up. Hi, Tom and Jimmy. Do you think Bitcoin is going to become heavily regulated? What are your general thoughts on how the government here in the US, for example, and around the world too, have handled crypto? What would the US government have to do to quote unquote kill Bitcoin at a functional level? And thank you for your time.
Yeah, I don't think they can kill it, and you can kind of see it in China. So
Hmm.
China's banned Bitcoin like in some small way, like 30 times or something between 2013 and
Yeah.
2017. And there was all these news articles, and the first time it happened, like there was a big drop in Bitcoin. Second time it happened, it dropped big again. And by the fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth time, like nobody cared, right? Like, and finally in 2017, they were just sort of like, "Hey, we're going to ban all exchanges here in China." And guess what happened? Well, people started using local Bitcoins. That's a peer-to-peer way to trade, and the demand on local Bitcoins and the volume exchange there went through the roof
Hmm.
because there weren't exchanges. And so, of course, China said we're going to ban the website, local Bitcoins, and any other similar things we're also going to ban. So they banned them. So what happened next? Well, these people started going and creating their own WeChat groups, their
Hmm.
own Telegram groups. They started trading on their own because, of course, there's a thriving market for that. And try as they might to ban sort of exchanging, people found a way. And I expect similar things to happen should India ban Bitcoin. People are gonna. I think WhatsApp is very much used there. So it's possible that India would have a lot of WhatsApp users or WhatsApp groups or something like that if they ban Bitcoin. Like just saying that people are not allowed to do X is usually not enough, and enforcement in this case is going to be extremely difficult because you would literally have to go into each person's house and figure out what they're doing, or
Hmm.
there are always ways to shield what you're doing, or to encrypt your web traffic and things like that. So, like they could ban the companies, and that's probably the point of pressure that they'll use. But I don't think it would succeed. But in any case, there are already senators and representatives that are into Bitcoin. Senator Cynthia Lummis from Wyoming, Congressman Warren Davidson from Ohio, Patrick McHenry from North Carolina. Like they, I believe, own Bitcoin and are advocating for Bitcoin, and there will probably be more along the way. So it's like there are many ways in which many fronts in which we can fight this, and worst case scenario, you can still do things over the internet.
Yeah, I mean, the things I would say is without getting into too many details, is Bitcoin really was designed to be hard to get rid of. Like it
Mm.
actually doesn't require that much to function or to send a transaction. Like you can send it
Mm.
over radio signals. I've seen people do proofs of concepts and maybe even actually make it work of like you can just use an emoji, alphabet to make a Bitcoin transaction and as long as the app you could a very simple app you could decode it into an address. you can send that. It really, and I know there's like Bitcoin satellites now launched by a couple of startups just in case
Yeah.
they try to ban it. And they're already there, guys. They're up there.
Mhm.
There's these really cheap kits for sending it. It's already very, very much so kind of prepared itself. People just, with the money and extra time they have been preparing Bitcoin in case the Western governments try to ban it. There's already satellites going around. It would not be very easy to do. Additionally, like, I think all of this comes from theoretically could the US, if they all agreed, just, oh, all these companies are banned, all these websites are banned, and if we catch you using it, you're in trouble. Would that damage Bitcoin and maybe delay its adoption for 10 years? Perhaps. But do you really think all US senators and congressmen and women are going to agree tomorrow
Yeah.
on one thing? I mean, I just started Googling around and I found some billionaire saying Bitcoin's bad. And then I saw Kentucky apparently just made Bitcoin mining tax deductible, which is interesting. Maybe I shouldn't be moving to Tennessee. But like, I mean, like you can see all these different approaches, but the point is, at least in the US, right? And a lot of Western governments are organized in a similar fashion. States can make a lot of their own laws. And if you're not, I don't think you're going to get any federal thing where it's just all banned or where one state, and so if that doesn't happen, it's not going to be banned. I think if you wanted to ban it, the the Illuminati or whatever conspiracy people you would want to put in, they would have. I think 2013 is when they should have done it. It's a little too late now. It's adopted. There's people in government saying it's good. I think it's too late, honestly.
Mhm. I think you're right, and it's the cat's out of the bag, and it's already decentralized. There's no single choke point that you're going to be able to regulate, and so on. It's designed that way, so yeah, I don't think you could kill it.
So I've got a couple of wrap-up questions here. Cass writes in and asks, what do you think about the prospect of introducing Rust code to the Bitcoin code base? Thoughts on Rust in general as a Bitcoin core level language? Hashtag Rust Evangelism Strike Force.
Yeah, Rust is a great language, and there's already a lot of projects in Rust in Bitcoin. So there's a project called Rust Lightning that Square uses to have a Lightning library available in Rust. I'm not aware of a Rust Bitcoin client, although it wouldn't surprise me. There have been discussions about moving over to Rust from C++, but that didn't really go anywhere because the whole code base is, or a large part of the code base is in C++. That said, it's got potential as ancillary stuff, and certainly things like Rust Lightning are going to be very helpful going forward. So yeah, it's a good language. I like it, and I think there is going to be a lot of Bitcoin projects that are written in it.
Valko Malev writes in and asks, what is the best way to progress my career of a programmer? What is the one thing that is most commonly neglected? And besides improving my skills and knowledge in the field of machine learning, which our company works with a lot of data, and I'm hoping that I can progress in that path specifically, I don't know what I can do more in order to progress in my career. What advice would you give me besides that and improving my social skills, which, believe me, I'm working on?
Yeah, social skills are very important. The thing that I would say is, well, it depends on which track you want to go. So usually programmers are given two tracks. You can go sort of like the architect route or the managerial route. The top level architect is usually called the CTO in any company. The top level manager is something like a VP of engineering, something like that. And those are pretty different tracks, and you're gonna want to figure out which one you want to go to because they require very different things. So if you're going down sort of like the architect track, then you want to be the expert in a lot of stuff, right? Like you need to absorb a lot of knowledge, and you need to be able to opine on all of that. Now, that's not to say that you can ignore people skills on this track, because you really do need to communicate your ideas effectively. You need to be able to communicate with your project managers and things like that to be able to explain your ideas and explain the concepts in a way that they can understand. You're probably also going to be writing a good deal of documentation and product specifications and things like that as the architect. So make sure you enjoy doing that stuff. And if you can do stuff like that really well, then yeah, like yeah, go towards that track. It's probably going to mean you're, playing with different languages every few months. It's going to mean like trying out different tech stacks and like knowing the good the pluses and minuses of each one and things of that nature. You're going to read probably a good deal of books and go to conferences, listen to talks, and connect with other people. Also, like getting to that level, you're going to want to get to know sort of salesman types, and it's going to sound a little weird, but the easiest way to become a CTO is to be a co-founder, right? Like, and oftentimes that requires teaming up with somebody else. And generally, I tell a lot of programmers, if you're a really good programmer, what you want to partner up with is somebody that can sell. And the two things that a startup needs are, like a good product, which you're going to provide as the CTO, and somebody that can sell that product, somebody that's a salesman type. If you can't do those two things, then you're not really. It's going to be very hard for you to get off the ground. So those are the two things. So get to know some salesman types. You might need to network a little bit and hang out with people of that type. I think a really good step in your career, if you get a chance to do it, is to take on some sort of like sales engineering role. That's
I took on that, and I think it just, in the mechanical engineering side, made me. I grew so much more in my ability to just accomplish things when I became a sales
present,
engineer.
right? Like you're doing right now, and that's a very important quality. And the subtle thing that you're going to get out of that is you'll get to know what really good salesmen are, right? Like the people that don't sell, you're going to be like, okay, well, like maybe not this person, but the people that really know how to sell, you're gonna pick up on at least cues to know, hey, this person's really good at selling, and here's what they're doing to do that. And you can identify potential people to found a company with. Now, if you don't, if you don't want to start your own company, you don't necessarily need to do that. But that's another way in which you can progress in your career towards an architect. The other path is more managerial. Again, this is like the path to VP of engineering or something like that. You're going to want to study like different processes. So code review, extreme programming, partner programming, testing frameworks. How to recruit people. You're going to need to convince a lot of people to come join your organization. So that tends to be a big skill. Again, sales engineering might be helpful in that role because you're going to need to sell yourself to a large degree to people that don't necessarily know that much about tech. And make it clear that you can meet deadlines, you can meet goals, and have good discipline and deliver on the things that you promise. That you could define the things that maybe they're not entirely clear on, that you could push back and protect your engineers from a lot of meetings. So you're going to have to like go to a lot of meetings on their behalf and like protect them from that and things of that nature. You're going to have to develop a lot of people skills because you're going to have good relationships with the people that you're managing, and that's oftentimes very difficult for a lot of programmers. So unless you have a desire,
you really stick out if you were good at that, you're saying.
Yeah. And like having good relationships, right? Like I actually care about your career. I want to help you succeed. Like, and communicating that, like letting them know that you want them to grow. Like these are all skills that you're going to need to pick up. And that means that you're going to have to interact with people a lot more, and and not just, hey, like I'm selling myself. It's hey, I actually care about you, and I want you to grow. How can I help you grow in your career? Like most people think of that like downwards, right? How can I help the people that are working for me to grow in their career? It's actually more important that you do that for the people that are above you. So if you can help your manager get that promotion, guess who he's going to bring with you, or who she's going to bring with you, right? Like that. And you need to learn how to sort of do that. And a lot of it is making them look good and, getting a good relationship with a lot of people. So those would be the things that I would say. But yeah, it all depends on you. Some people like they listen to what I just said and go, "Oh, that sounds horrible. I don't want to do that." Or and it's okay to like stay in your position, but if you do want to grow, if you have a little more ambition and more time on your hands, certainly, because all of these positions you're going to spend way more time than you do now as a programmer that's doing whatever. You're going to you have to put in the work and really enjoy the things that you might not enjoy right now.
Yeah, and I mean, I would say no matter what you do, I mean, I went from like, God, I worked as a like industrial engineer for an insurance company to automotive engineering to sales to now podcasting. I'm probably not a normal person, but I would just say that no matter if you have ambition, like really listen to how you're feeling. And if you're not growing, then you're probably not growing, right? It's very easy to get into a position, keep doing that for years, and then go, have you really learned any new skills? Like if you came back to this day one, would you do it better? Because if I think of myself, if I were to be thrown back into my previous roles, I would do so much better than I used to do when I was like 25. And, and if you look back and that's not happening, then that it might be a little scary, but you need to make sure you're challenging yourself in a way that's forcing you to develop new skills. Right. And I think a lot of people, and some people don't want to do that, and that's fine. If you want one position or whatever, but if you really are ambitious, just make sure what you're doing is actually making you better at something. All right. Yeah. Final question. John O'Shea writes in and asks, in 15 years, do you think you'll be able to order a Big Mac for 99 Satoshis?
That might be too much money. Yeah, you might get like 10 Whoppers. I don't know.
So there it is. If anything, underestimating how much it could be worth, which I don't make any exact predictions because it's just, why would you do that? But I would say just, there's only really, I mean, some of it's been lost. There's really probably only about 12 million Bitcoins, and that's less Bitcoins than there are millionaires in the US. So if they all wanted one, they're not getting it. That's all I would say. All right. Well, on that Bitcoin to the moon note, I guess we'll leave it there. Jimmy, I really want to thank you for coming on. I mean, this was awesome. I mean, to be honest, I've seen you on other interviews all over the YouTube. You're always talking to Tone Vase or some other weird people, to be honest. But I mean, there have always been really good conversations, and you're always someone who's just like, that guy knows what that guy isn't full of shit, I think.
Thanks. I'll put that on my resume. Not full of shit.
I mean, it would, speaking of standing out in an industry, I think it would be like the number one thing for this one. But yeah, I mean, I think this will be a good kind of introductory thing for people. As usual, they'll probably walk away with more questions than answers. But now hopefully they know which questions to ask. And yeah, thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, hopefully you can pick up my books if you want to learn more. And
plug yourself.
A lot of that. Yeah, so I've written 3 books. Programming Bitcoin, if you're a programmer, it teaches you all about the Bitcoin protocol. Little Bitcoin book, that's for people that don't know much about Bitcoin at all and just want like to understand what it's about. It makes the case for Bitcoin from like a human rights perspective and all that. And then Thank God for Bitcoin. That's the moral argument for Bitcoin. It comes from a Christian perspective, though you don't have to be Christian to appreciate that. You don't want to be stealing from people. I also have my website, programmingbitcoin.com. I have my newsletter, jimmysong.substack.com. I have a 2-day, programming seminar for people that want to learn Bitcoin in a very intense way. It's like 2 days of 8 hours per day instruction. The next one may be in Miami, definitely in Mexico in August, but possibly in Miami in June. There's also my Twitter, Jimmy Song, Medium, Jimmy Song, GitHub, Jimmy Song. You can go check them out. And I'm tweeting all the time. So, go take a look at that if you're interested.
And I'll put all of those in the description as well so people can find them. But yep. Again, thank you for coming on. I really enjoyed this. And thank you to everyone for listening.
Thank you for having me.
The following podcast was brought to you by the YouTube channel and website Moore's Law is Dead. Moore's Law is Dead and Broken Silicon are trademarks of their creator, Tom. That guy is me, and I am indeed the creator, editor, writer, and showrunner of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, videos, articles, and other media. However, Moore's Law is Dead is a team, with Broken Silicon co-hosted by my brother, Dan, audio editing by Gerard Cortez, and select technical editing by Carbon Cry. You can find all of our information, including how to get a hold of us, at www.mooreslawsdead.com. And if you are a fan and would like to send mail or other hardware, please mail parcels to Moore's Law is Dead, P.O. Box 10468, Peoria, Illinois 61612. And speaking of fans, without exaggeration, the patrons are responsible for the continued distribution of the content you just listened to. And so if you have some extra money, but only if you do, please consider supporting us. For just $2 a month, you get access to the exclusive podcast Die Shrink, voting on subjects of future podcast episodes, the ability to have your questions read aloud on Broken Silicon, Die Shrink, and Loose Ends, and of course the Moore's Law is Dead Discord full of like-minded people who would love to meet you. I am one of them. And at higher tiers, you get access to ad-free episodes of Broken Silicon, the back catalog of Flyover States podcast, thanks in the credits of videos and podcasts, and other perks as well. And if you cannot afford to support us, please just share Moore's Law is Dead videos and podcasts with friends and family on social media and Reddit. And give Broken Silicon and Flyover States a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. All of this really does help so much more than I think anyone realizes. If you'd like to advertise on the podcast or a person of interest who would like to be a guest, please reach out to the email address mlhbdead@gmail.com. But as I said, this podcast would not be possible without its fans supporting it. And so now it is time to give a personal thanks to the greatest of the fans. The following supporters are at the 10 gigahertz or higher producer levels.
Brad Medlin, Telos, GUK, Benny Berlin, Justin Yant, Thomas Rupp, I Love You, Lynn Jim, Ivan K, Tom Bailey, Muhammad Al-Kawari, Frederick Lau, James Crassa, Justin Parrish, Zachary Martin, Terrence Herod, Drita Full, Phil S, Courtney Elliott, The Ninth Dude, Greg Renegard, Josh Law, JBG, Travis Gooding, The Mechanical Philosopher, Lebo King Kilo, Fatboy Dieseru, Daniel Hyde, Burt Garcia, Tara Reed, Jack O'Neill, Matt Salem, Aaron Close, Son Garcia, Sean Vollmer, My Name is Nobody, Joel Corey, Alethros, Telos, Hey There's a Kitty, Greg T. Wanchik, Ivan214, John Jameson, Benjamin Cannon, Matthew Lane, Divider Symbol, Jan Rano, Rubber Ducks, Michael Maggie, Ali Robertson, Eric Jackson, Jonathan, Patrick Groh, Evan Dingle, Dominique Cox, Stefan, Original Us, Hard4Room.com, Sam MacArthur, Total Silo, Sol Connor, Michael Costa, Andrew S., Blake, Aaron Keith, Carrie Baldino, Endless Logins, Tom Sanfilippo, Justice Brennan, Viking R., Trevor Power, Stu, Alenia, Nanyan, Daniel Nishpal, Franco Frederick, Dan Galinowski, Alex Karras Steele, Dark Rain 2049, Lane Perry, Joseph Kierman, Carlos Faldos, Carnivore Bear, Denovan Russell, Zebra Z. Burrs, Licky Man Porshigi, David Cowden, Ricky Tan, Spencer King, Patrick J.S., Justin Staples, Freddie Canos Jr., Stephen Coates, Kiwi Phil, Dahoo Hoo, Sarah Light, Anthony Garefa, Matthew Griffin, Alex, Joseph Loria, Luis Correa, Deke, Cheesy Ramen, Raul Abaneni, Tim Robbins, Jake Dude 23, Brian Riggleman, Chris Williams, Ryan Deniscu, Dave McCoy, Valco Malev, Gabe Langner, Rodney, Morton Svensson, Andrew, Thomas Summers, Maurice Courtois, Matthew J. Link, Scott Ref Schneider, Mai Sharona, Aaron, Roman, Jacob Skamix, Air Rats, Wakir Khan, Eshil Dar Epstein, Stephen Hart, Christopher A. Butler, Greg, Peter Moore, Chris Licata, Justin Thomas, Sam Miller, Sammy Malas, Kevin Chen, Shakir, Nick Rakin, Holden Mobley, Matthew Lazier, R. Pete Sharma, Meat and Pork, Jimmy N.G., Mads Beachhorn, Benjamin Oshleys, Jiu-Jits, Sean Parker, Dame P, John Wisink, Sam Venzel, Mark Mitchell, Brucha, Michael Deaton, and of course, thank you to Sahara for the music.